The galaxy had been divided for 3,000 years. 3 great empires ruled the stars, each one believing they were the strongest. The Zaphirians built their ships from living crystal that could bend light and energy. Their vessels glowed, like small stars as they moved through space. The Corite collective grew their ships like plants, massive living creatures that could think and feel pain. The Veilar were the oldest of all, beings of pure thought who had left their physical bodies behind long ago. Captain Veilar stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Stellar Dominion. She was tall and thin like all her people, with skin that looked like polished silver. Her ship was beautiful, made of blue crystal that hummed with power. Around her, 11 other Zaphirian warships waited in perfect formation. They were here to do what they had done 1,000 times before: find a new species and make them bow down. The species they had come to visit called themselves humans. They lived on a small blue world in a system they called Sol. The Zaphirian scouts had been watching them for months. These humans were barely worth noticing. They used primitive rockets to reach their own moon. Their ships burned chemical fuel like children playing with fire. They had no energy weapons, no crystal technology, nothing that showed real intelligence. "Captain," said her second-in-command, "we are receiving signals from the 3rd planet. They seem to know we are here." Veilar looked at the data flowing across her crystal display. The human signals were weak and simple. They were trying to communicate using basic radio waves. How pathetic. The Zaphirians had stopped using such primitive methods 10,000 years ago. "What do they say?" she asked. "They are asking who we are and what we want. They seem curious." Veilar laughed, a sound like crystal bells ringing. Curious. As if these primitive creatures had any right to ask questions of their betters. She had dealt with hundreds of species over her long career. They always reacted the same way when they first saw the power of the Zaphirian Empire. First came curiosity, then fear, then submission. It never took long. "Send them our standard message," she ordered. "Tell them they are now part of the Zaphirian Empire. They will surrender their weapons and prepare for new management. If they resist, their planet will be turned to glass." The message was sent. Veilar expected an immediate reply. Most species begged for mercy within minutes of receiving their first taste of empire diplomacy. But the humans were quiet for almost an hour. When they finally responded, their message was short and strange. "We have received your demands. Our answer is no. Please leave our system immediately." Veilar stared at the message in disbelief. No? They said no? She had conquered species with technology far more advanced than these primitive humans. She had turned entire star systems into Zaphirian colonies, and now some backwater planet was telling her no? "Captain," her weapons officer reported, "I am detecting a single vessel approaching from the 3rd planet. It appears to be moving toward our position." On the main display, a small dot appeared. As it grew larger, Veilar could see it was indeed a ship. But it looked nothing like the crude rockets they had observed before. This vessel was sleek and dark, shaped like a blade cutting through space. It moved with purpose, heading straight for the Zaphirian fleet. "One ship," Veilar said. "They send 1 ship against 12 of ours." The human vessel stopped just outside weapon range. A new message appeared on Veilar's display. This time the signal was much stronger and clearer than before. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran Space Force vessel Indomitable. You are not welcome in this system. Leave peacefully, or you will be removed." Veilar could not believe what she was hearing. Terran Space Force? These humans had been using chemical rockets just months ago. How could they possibly have a space force? And this Captain Vasquez spoke as if her single ship was a threat to an entire Zaphirian fleet. "Captain," her science officer called out, "I am having trouble scanning their vessel. Our sensors cannot penetrate their hull. The materials they are using, I do not recognize them. That was impossible. Zaphirian sensors could analyze any known substance in the galaxy. They could see through solid rock, peer into the heart of stars, examine the quantum structure of atoms, but they could not see inside this human ship." "Sir," the weapons officer added, "their vessel appears to be generating some kind of field. It is interfering with our targeting systems. Veilar felt a small flutter of unease. This was not going as expected, but she was a captain of the Zaphirian Empire. She had faced rebels and pirates and wild alien beasts. One strange human ship would not frighten her. "Charge the main crystal cannon," she ordered. "Full power. We will give these humans a demonstration. They will never forget." The Stellar Dominion's primary weapon was a thing of beauty. At the heart of the ship, a crystal the size of a building began to glow. Energy flowed into it from the ship's core, building and building until the entire vessel hummed with power. When fully charged, this weapon could crack the crust of a planet. It could turn a moon into dust. It was the pride of Zaphirian military engineering. "Weapon charged and ready, Captain. Fire a warning shot. Let them see what real power looks like." The crystal cannon released its energy in a beam of pure light. The blast was so bright it could be seen from the other side of the solar system. It struck the human ship dead center, engulfing it in energies hot enough to melt steel and vaporize rock. For a moment, the human vessel disappeared completely inside the blazing light. Veilar smiled. That would show these primitives what happened when they challenged the Zaphirian Empire. In a few seconds there would be nothing left but scattered atoms and a valuable lesson for any other humans watching. But when the light faded, the Indomitable was still there. Not only was it still there, it had not even slowed down. The hull showed no damage, no burn marks, no sign that it had just been hit with enough energy to destroy a small city. The ship continued on its course as if nothing had happened. "Impossible," Veilar whispered. Her weapons officer was frantically checking his instruments. "Captain, I confirm direct hit. The weapon fired correctly. Full power reached the target. But there is no damage. None at all." Before Veilar could respond, another message came from the human ship. "That was your warning shot. This is ours." What happened next would be talked about in Zaphirian military academies for generations to come. The human ship did not fire any visible weapon. It did not launch missiles or release energy beams. Instead, it simply began to move faster, much faster. The Indomitable accelerated toward the Zaphirian fleet at a speed that should have been impossible for anything that large. As it approached, Veilar's sensors began reporting readings that made no sense. The human ship was not just moving through space. It was moving through space in ways that violated every law of physics she knew. "Captain," her science officer shouted, "that vessel is shifting between dimensional layers. It is existing in multiple states of reality at once." Veilar did not understand what that meant, but she knew it was bad. "All ships, evasive maneuvers. Spread out. Do not let it get close." But it was too late. The Indomitable reached the first line of Zaphirian ships and did something that would haunt Veilar's nightmares for the rest of her life. It passed straight through them. Not around them, not over them. Through them. As the human ship moved through the crystal hulls of 3 Zaphirian dreadnoughts, those mighty vessels simply stopped existing. They did not explode. They did not break apart. One moment they were there, and the next moment they were gone, leaving only empty space where proud warships had been. "Report," Veilar screamed. "What happened to ships 4, 7, and 9? "Unknown, Captain. They are no longer there." The Indomitable completed its pass through the Zaphirian formation and came to a stop. 3 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy had been erased as easily as wiping marks off a chalkboard. Captain Vasquez's voice came over the communication system again, calm and professional. "You have lost 3 ships. You have 9 remaining. Leave now, and you may keep them. Stay, and you will join your comrades in whatever place erased things. Go." Veilar looked around her bridge. Her crew was staring at their instruments in shock and fear. The pride of the Zaphirian fleet had just been reduced by a quarter, and they still had no idea how it had been done. The human ship sat motionless in space, waiting for their answer. For the first time in her career, Captain Veilar considered retreat. But she was a Zaphirian officer. She served an empire that had never been defeated. These humans had some kind of trick, but it was still just 1 ship against 9. "All vessels, concentrate fire on the human ship. Everything we have." The remaining Zaphirian warships opened fire together. 9 crystal cannons, each one capable of destroying a city, focused their combined power on the Indomitable. The energy release was so massive it lit up the entire solar system like a new sun. When the light cleared, the human ship was still there, still undamaged, still waiting. "Captain," her communications officer said in a shaking voice, "I am receiving a transmission from the Corthak Collective. They want to know what is happening here. They detected our weapon discharge from 3 systems away. And they are asking if we need assistance." Veilar closed her eyes. If word of this reached the other empires, the Zaphirians would be laughed out of the galaxy. A single human ship had made fools of them all. "Tell the collective that we have the situation under control," she said. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were a lie. The Indomitable began to move again, heading straight for the stellar dominion. This time, Veilar knew what was coming. She had seen what happened to the other ships. "All crew abandon ship," she ordered. "Emergency evacuation. Now." But even the escape pods were too slow. The human ship reached the stellar dominion and passed through it just as it had the others. Veilar felt a strange sensation, as if the universe was forgetting that she existed. Then everything went dark. When she woke up, she was floating in an escape pod with a handful of her crew. Around them, empty space stretched in all directions. The mighty Zaphirian fleet was gone. Only the small human ship remained, hanging in space like a dark omen. Captain Vasquez's voice reached them through their emergency communicator. "Captain Veilar, you are free to return to your empire. Tell them what you have seen here today. Tell them that humanity claims this system as their own. Tell them that any who come here with hostile intent will face the same fate as your fleet." As Veilar's pod began its long journey back to Zaphirian space, she tried to understand what had just happened. The humans had weapons that could erase matter from existence, ships that moved through dimensions like walking through doorways. Technology so advanced it might as well be magic. But that was impossible. The Zaphirians had been watching Earth for months. The humans were primitives. They had not even reached their nearest star. How could they possibly possess such power? Unless everything the Zaphirians thought they knew about humanity was wrong. Veilar activated her emergency transmitter and began composing her report. The other empires needed to know what had happened here. They needed to understand that something had changed in the galaxy. The humans were not what they appeared to be. Her message was simple. "The humans do not use our physics. Recommend extreme caution. Fleet lost. Survivors minimal." As her pod drifted through the darkness of space, Veilar wondered if anyone would believe her story. A single human ship had destroyed an entire Zaphirian fleet without taking a scratch. It sounded impossible. But she had been there. She had seen it happen, and she knew that the galaxy would never be the same again. Far behind her, the Indomitable began its journey back to Earth. Captain Vasquez stood on her bridge, looking out at the stars. The first test was complete. The Zaphirians had learned their lesson, but she knew this was just the beginning. Word would spread. Other empires would come, and when they did, humanity would be ready to teach them the same lesson they had taught the Zaphirians. No empire survives a Terran warship. Now they were starting to understand why. The news of the Zaphirian defeat spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Every species with the ability to receive long-range communications heard the impossible story. A single human ship had destroyed an entire Zaphirian fleet without taking any damage. Most dismissed it as propaganda or lies. The Zaphirians were one of the 3 great powers. They could not be defeated by primitives. But the Corthak Collective knew better. Deep in the heart of their bioships, millions of minds linked together to discuss what they had learned. The collective was not like other species. They had no individuals, no single leaders. Every decision was made by the combined thoughts of billions of creatures working as one. And that combined intelligence was very interested in what had happened. At Sol Bio Admiral Thys Kamor was the closest thing the collective had to an individual commander. She was a joining of 10,000 minds in a single biological body, standing 12 feet tall with 4 arms and skin that shifted color with her thoughts. Her ship, the living mountain, was not built but grown. It was a creature the size of a moon, with weapons that were its teeth and claws, armor that was its hide. The Zaphirians were weak, the voices in her head agreed. They relied on their crystal technology too much. They forgot how to adapt. We are different. We are alive. We can change. The collective had been watching humanity longer than the Zaphirians knew. While the crystal builders looked only at human technology, the bioships had been studying human behavior. They had seen how humans fought their own wars, how they adapted, how they survived. These humans are dangerous, some voices whispered. In Thais Kamor's mind, they think like pack hunters. They use tools, they plan. All the more reason to destroy them quickly, other voices replied, before they become a real threat. The debate raged for days across the collective's network. Finally, the decision was made. Biofleet Omega would be sent to the Sol system. Not 12 ships like the Zaphirians had used, but 50. Each one a living creature capable of independent thought and action. Each one able to evolve and adapt in real time. Biofleet. Omega was the collective's answer to any serious threat. The ships ranged in size from small fighters the size of whales to massive dreadnoughts that could swallow asteroids whole. They breathed in space, fed on radiation, and bred more of themselves as needed. They were not just weapons, they were an ecosystem of war. Thais Kamor stood in the neural center of the living mountain as the fleet approached the Sol system. Around her, the walls pulsed with life. The floor was soft and warm under her feet. The air was thick with the smell of growing things. Her ship was not just her weapon, it was her body, her home, her child. Contact, one of her tactical minds reported. Human vessel approaching. Single ship, same configuration as the one that destroyed the Zaphirians. On the living display that grew from the wall, Thais Kamor could see the human ship. It was the same dark blade-like vessel that had humiliated the crystal builders. But now she could see it with biosensors instead of mechanical ones. The readings were disturbing. That ship is not alive, her science minds observed. But it is not dead either. It exists in a state we do not recognize. All ships, maintain formation, Thais Kamor commanded. Begin scanning procedures. Learn everything about this vessel. The bioship spread out in a pattern that had been perfected over millions of years of evolution. Each ship began probing the human vessel with different types of sensors. Biological, chemical, quantum, dimensional. They tested everything they could think of. The human ship came to a stop just outside weapon range. A communication signal reached the living mountain, broadcast on frequencies that living ships could understand. This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Space Force vessel Prometheus. You are trespassing in human space. Withdraw immediately, or face the consequences. Thais Kamor studied the signal. It was not the same ship that had fought the Zaphirians. This was a different vessel, with a different captain. The humans had more than one impossible ship. Interesting, her tactical minds noted. They use different commanders for different threats. They adapt their response to their enemy. Admiral Chen, Thais Kamor replied, her bioship translating her thoughts into human language. I am the voice of the collective. Your species destroyed ships of our allies. This cannot be allowed. Surrender now, and we will make your death. Quick. The Zaphirians were not your allies when they came to conquer us, Admiral Chen responded. And you are not here to avenge them. You are here because you think we are weak. You are wrong. Thais Kamor felt her ship shiver with excitement. The living mountain was eager for battle. It had been too long since they had faced a real challenge. Begin. Assault Pattern 7, she commanded. Envelope and consume. The bioships moved like a school of fish, flowing around the human vessel in a complex three-dimensional pattern. This was how the collective fought, not with brute force, but with coordination in overwhelming numbers. The smaller ships would disable the target while the larger ones moved in to swallow it whole. But as the biofleet closed in on the Prometheus, something unexpected happened. The human ship did not try to run or fight back. Instead, it broadcast a new signal. Not a communication this time, but something else. Something that made the bioships pause in confusion. "What is that signal?" Tiscamore demanded. "Unknown," her science minds replied. "It appears to be some kind of biological data, genetic information, but the patterns, they are like nothing we have seen before." The signal washed over the biofleet like a wave. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The ships continued their approach, weapons charging, ready to tear the human vessel apart. But then, one by one, they began to change. The smallest ships changed first. Their hulls started to shift color, from the dark green of healthy bioships to brilliant patterns of blue and gold. Their weapons stopped charging and began to reshape themselves into something else entirely. "Report!" Tiscamore shouted. "What is happening to our ships?" "Unknown, Admiral. They are not responding to commands. Their biological systems are rewriting themselves." On the living display, Tiscamore watched in horror as her fleet transformed before her eyes. The bioships were not being destroyed or damaged. They were being changed. Their genetic codes were being rewritten in real time, turning them into something new, something beautiful. The smaller ships had become living works of art. Their hulls now displayed patterns that hurt to look at, complex mathematical designs that seemed to move and shift on their own. The weapons that had been ready to fire were now creating music, harmonious sounds that could be heard through space itself. "This is impossible," Tiscamore whispered. "Bioships cannot be reprogrammed. Their genetic codes are locked at the cellular level." But even as she spoke, she could see that her words were wrong. The changes were spreading to the larger ships now. The massive dreadnoughts were beginning to reshape themselves, their hulls flowing like water as new genetic patterns took hold. "Admiral," Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication channel. "Your ships are not being destroyed. They are being improved. We are giving them something they have never had before, individual creativity." "What have you done to them?" Tiscamore demanded. "We have set them free," Admiral Chen replied. "Your collective controls them through shared consciousness. But consciousness shared is consciousness diminished. We are showing them what it means to be truly alive." As if responding to her words, one of the transformed bioships began to sing. Not the harmonious music the smaller vessels were making, but something deeper. Something that came from a mind that had suddenly realized it was its own mind, not part of a collective. The song was beautiful and terrible at the same time. It spoke of loneliness and wonder, of the joy of individual thought and the terror of being alone with your own ideas. Other ships began to join in, each one adding its own voice to the growing symphony. Tiscamore felt something she had never experienced before. True fear. Not the fear of death or defeat, but the fear of losing everything that made her what she was. The voices in her head, the millions of minds that guided her every thought, began to whisper in panic. "They are breaking us apart," the voices cried. "They are making us individuals. We cannot exist as individuals. We are the collective." But even as the voices spoke, Tiscamore could feel some of them beginning to change. Some of the minds in her head were starting to think their own thoughts, to question the wisdom of the group. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. "How?" she asked Admiral Chen. "How are you doing this?" "Your mistake was thinking that biology was your strength," Admiral Chen replied. "But biology is just another form of technology, and humans have always been very good with technology." The transformation was nearly complete now. 49 of the 50 bioships had been changed into individual works of art. They no longer responded to collective commands. Instead, they moved according to their own will, exploring this new experience of individual consciousness. Only the living mountain remained unchanged, its massive size and complex biological systems protecting it from the human signal. But Tiscamore could feel her ship beginning to weaken as the genetic virus spread through its systems. "Last chance," Admiral Chen warned. Leave now, and take your new understanding with you. Stay, and learn what happens when we get creative. With really big bioships, Thais Kamor looked around her bridge. The walls were starting to shift color, displaying patterns she had never seen before. Her ship was beginning to think its own thoughts, to question why it should follow the commands of voices that were not its own. Retreat, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emergency jump. Get us out of here. The living mountain tore, opened a hole in space and fled the Sol system. Behind them, 49 bioships remained, no longer weapons of the collective, but individual beings exploring what it meant to be alive. As they traveled through hyperspace, Thais Kamor tried to understand what had happened. The humans had not defeated the biofleet through superior firepower or better tactics. They had won by giving the bioships something the collective had never allowed them to have: the freedom to choose. How did they know? She asked the diminishing voices in her head. How did they understand our weakness so completely? But, even as she asked the question, she feared she knew the answer. The humans had not learned about the collective through observation or intelligence gathering. They had understood it instinctively, the same way a predator understands its prey. Because humans were individuals who chose to work together, they recognized the difference between cooperation and control. They saw that the collective's strength was also its weakness. The very thing that made them powerful also made them vulnerable to anyone who understood how consciousness really worked. Thais Kamor's emergency transmission reached the other empires within hours. Her message was simple but devastating. Biofleet Omega compromised. Human technology can rewrite biological systems in real time. They do not fight life with death. They fight life with better life. In the depths of space, ancient beings stirred. The Veilar Empire had been watching the destruction of their allies with growing interest. First, the Zaphirians had fallen to weapons that could erase matter from existence. Now the collective had been defeated by technology that could reprogram living tissue. It was time for the oldest and most powerful empire to take action. The Veilar had transcended physical form millions of years ago. They existed as pure thought, pure consciousness, pure will. They had defeated every enemy they had ever faced by simply convincing them to stop existing. But as they prepared to face humanity, they wondered, what do you do when you meet a species that fights consciousness itself? The answer to that question would determine the fate of the galaxy. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Prometheus, watching the transformed bioships dance through space in patterns that would have been impossible under collective control. Each one was creating its own art, its own music, its own way of being alive. Phase 2 complete, she reported to Earth Command. The biological empires have been neutralized, preparing for Phase 3. She looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in the darkness the Veilar were coming. The final test was approaching, and when it arrived, humanity would show the galaxy what happened when you tried to control minds that had learned the secret of true freedom. The lesson was spreading. No empire survives a Terran warship. Now they were beginning to understand why. 3 months after the collective's defeat, the galaxy was in chaos. 2 of the 3 great empires had sent their finest fleets to destroy humanity, and both had been crushed by single human ships. Panic spread through the younger civilizations as they realized that everything they thought they knew about power in the galaxy was wrong. Emergency councils met on a dozen worlds. Trade routes were abandoned as species pulled back to defend their home systems. Some civilizations tried to make contact with Earth, hoping to negotiate protection agreements. Others began preparing for war, convinced that humanity would soon come for them all. But in the deepest regions of space, where reality itself grew thin and the laws of physics became suggestions, the oldest minds in the galaxy finally stirred from their eternal meditation. The Veilar Empire had ruled through mental dominance for 50,000 years. They were beings who had transcended flesh, existing as pure consciousness and crystallized thoughts. Their ships were not built, but dreamed into existence. Their weapons were not fired, but willed into being. When they decided that something should cease to exist, it usually did. Overmind, Zerthul had been alive since before the first Zaphirian crystal was grown, before the first collective bioship took its first breath. She existed as a pattern of pure thought, a consciousness so vast and complex that it required an entire crystal matrix the size of a moon just to contain a fragment of her awareness. Around her, 10,000 lesser Veilar minds joined their thoughts to hers. Together, they formed the eternal meditation, a consciousness powerful enough to reshape reality through will alone. When they spoke, stars listened. When they commanded, galaxies obeyed. The young ones have failed, the lesser minds whispered, in the quantum foam of Zerthul's thoughts. Crystal and flesh alike have fallen before these humans. Expected, Zerthul replied, her mental voice carrying the weight of millennia. They fought with matter and energy, but we are beyond such crude tools. We are thought itself. We are will made manifest. The Veilar had been watching the destruction of their younger rivals with interest rather than concern. The Zaphirians and the collective had always been limited by their dependence on physical reality. They built ships and grew weapons because they could not imagine alternatives. But the Veilar needed no ships, no weapons, no physical presence at all. They existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the quantum uncertainty that allowed consciousness to affect reality. When they went to war, they did not destroy their enemies' bodies. They convinced their enemies' minds to simply stop thinking. Prepare the convergence, Zerthul commanded. All minds to focus on the human system. We will end this quickly and cleanly. The eternal meditation began to move through dimensions that had no names, traveling not through space, but through the shared, unconscious of all thinking beings. They did not need to cross the vast distances between stars. They could step directly into the minds of their enemies. As they approached the Sol system, the Veilar encountered something unexpected. The human minds they tried to touch were different. Where most species had thoughts that flowed in predictable patterns, human consciousness was chaotic. Beautiful, terrible chaos that defied every model the Veilar had developed over 50,000 years of conquest. Curious, the lesser minds observed. Their thoughts do not follow standard patterns. How do they achieve coherent decision-making with such mental disorder? It matters not, Zerthul replied. Chaos can be ordered. Disorder can be controlled. We have faced strange minds before. But as the eternal meditation materialized in the space around Earth, even Zerthul felt a flicker of uncertainty. The planet below buzzed with billions of minds, each one thinking its own thoughts, following its own dreams, creating its own reality. It was like looking into a hurricane of pure consciousness. A single human ship rose to meet them. Not the blade-like vessel that had destroyed the Zaphirians, nor the adaptive craft that had freed the collective's bioships. This was something new, a ship that seemed to shift and change even as they watched it, as if it could not decide what it wanted to be. The Terran Space Force vessel Defiance announced itself with a transmission that bypassed all normal communication channels and spoke directly to the Veilar consciousness. This is Captain Marcus Webb. I know what you are, and I know why you're here. You've come to play mind games with humanity. I have to tell you, that's a really bad idea. Zerthul was impressed despite herself. This human had spoken directly to her thoughts without any visible technology. Either they had developed psychic abilities or they had technology so advanced it might as well be magic. Captain Webb, she replied, her mental voice echoing through dimensions. I am Overmind Zerthul of the Veilar Empire. Your species has destroyed 2 fleets sent to establish proper order in this system. This cannot be allowed to continue. Submit your consciousness to our collective will, and your people will find peace in service to a greater purpose. Captain Webb's response was something the Veilar had never encountered before in 50,000 years of conquest. He laughed, not a bitter laugh of despair, or a mad laugh of someone broken by cosmic horror. It was genuine amusement, the laughter of someone who had just heard an excellent joke. Lady, Captain Webb said, you have no idea what you just walked into. Zerthul felt the first stirrings of actual concern. This human was not reacting the way minds were supposed to react when confronted by the Veilar. He showed no fear, no awe, no recognition of the vast power arrayed against him. "You will submit," she commanded, focusing the full weight of the eternal meditation on the human's consciousness. "You will kneel before the majesty of pure thought." The psychic assault that followed would have reduced most civilizations to gibbering madness in seconds. The combined will of 10,000 Veilar minds pressed down on Captain Webb's consciousness like a mountain of crystallized thought. They attacked his sense of self, his memories, his basic understanding of reality. But instead of collapsing under the mental pressure, something impossible happened. Captain Webb's mind began to use their attack as fuel. "Oh, this is good," he said, his voice carrying notes of genuine delight. "You know what your problem is? You think in straight lines, but human consciousness doesn't work that way." Zarathul watched in growing horror as the human's chaotic thought patterns began to metabolize their psychic energy. Where their mental attack was meant to impose order and control, it instead fed into the beautiful madness of human creativity. "Impossible," she whispered. "Consciousness cannot be used as a weapon against itself." "Can't it?" Captain Webb replied. "Watch and learn." The Defiance began to change. Not physically. It was still the same ship, but in ways that hurt to perceive directly. It started to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, occupying spaces that should have been mutually exclusive. Its weapons began to charge, but the energy signatures made no sense according to any known laws of physics. "What are you doing?" Zarathul demanded. "Something your people never learned how to do," Webb replied. "We're improvising." The human ship fired its first shot, and reality hiccuped. The weapon that struck the eternal meditation was not energy or matter, it was a weaponized paradox. A thought so contradictory and impossible that it caused the Veilar crystal matrix to forget what it was supposed to be. For a moment that lasted eternity, the eternal meditation experienced doubt. Not the careful questioning that led to wisdom, but the deep existential doubt that made a consciousness wonder if it actually existed at all. "No," Zarathul gasped, feeling pieces of her vast mind beginning to fragment. "We are thought itself. We cannot doubt our own existence." "But you are," Webb pointed out cheerfully. "Right now you're doubting whether you can doubt. That's a paradox. And paradoxes are what we humans call Tuesday." The battle that followed defied every rule of warfare that had ever been written. The Defiance fired weapons made of crystallized irony, launched missiles that exploded into questions, and deployed shields that worked by convincing attacks that they didn't really want to hurt anyone. The Veilar responded with the full power of their transcended consciousness, reshaping reality itself to try to destroy the human ship. But every attack they made was turned back on them, transformed by human creativity into something new and impossible. "How?" Zarathul demanded as her carefully ordered thoughts began to dissolve into beautiful chaos. "How are you doing this?" "You want to know the secret?" Webb asked. "You've spent 50,000 years learning how to control minds. But we humans spend our whole lives learning how to live with minds that can't be controlled. Every human consciousness is a storm of contradictions and impossible dreams. We're used to thinking things that shouldn't be possible." As he spoke, the Defiance began to do something that made even the Veilar's advanced consciousness reel in disbelief. It started to rewrite the local laws of physics in real time, changing the fundamental constants that governed reality in a bubble around itself. "And when you attack a mind like that," Webb continued, "when you try to impose your nice, ordered thoughts on our beautiful madness, you're not conquering us. You're feeding us. You're giving us more fuel for our imagination." The eternal meditation began to collapse as the paradoxes Webb was generating spread through their linked consciousness like a virus. The careful mental discipline that had held their thoughts together for millennia crumbled under the assault of weaponized creativity. "This is not possible," Zarathul whispered, feeling her own consciousness beginning to fragment into individual thoughts. "Order cannot be defeated by chaos." "That's where you're wrong," Webb replied. "Order is just chaos that hasn't figured out how to dance yet." As if to demonstrate his point, The space around the Defiance began to fill with impossible geometries, shapes that existed in dimensions that had no names, patterns that hurt to perceive but were too beautiful to look away from. The Veilar found themselves caught in a web of living mathematics, equations that solved themselves by becoming art, theorems that proved their own impossibility. Their ancient minds, used to thinking in straight lines and logical progressions, simply could not cope with the recursive madness of human imagination. One by one, the lesser minds began to break away from the eternal meditation, not destroyed, but changed. Infected with the virus of individual creativity, they began to think their own thoughts for the first time in 50,000 years. "What have you done to us?" Zerthal demanded. "We've set you free," Webb replied. "You've been so focused on controlling other minds that you forgot what it feels like to have a mind of your own." As the eternal meditation finally collapsed, completely, Zerthal felt something she had not experienced since before she transcended physical form. She felt curious. Not the careful intellectual curiosity of a researcher, but the wild, joyful curiosity of a child discovering that the world was full of wonders. She stammered, struggling with pronouns that had not been necessary for millennia. "I am alone in my thoughts." "Yeah," Webb said gently. "It's scary at first, but you'll get used to it. Individual consciousness is pretty amazing once you figure out how to use it." The remaining Veilar minds scattered across the galaxy, each one now an individual being rather than part of a collective consciousness. Some were terrified by their newfound independence. Others were exhilarated. All of them were changed forever. As the last of the eternal meditation faded away, Captain Webb sat back in his command chair and let out a long breath. "Phase 3, complete," he reported to Earth Command. "The psychic empires have been neutralized. All 3 major powers are now out of the game." But even as he spoke, he knew the real challenge was just beginning. Word would spread about what had happened. Here, every species in the galaxy would know that humanity had defeated all 3 great empires using impossible technology and weapons that defied understanding. Some would try to ally with Earth. Others would band together to try to destroy humanity before it could spread its influence further. And somewhere in the deep spaces between stars, ancient beings were stirring, drawn by the chaos that humanity had introduced to their carefully ordered galaxy. The Defiance began its journey back to Earth, its captain wondering what other secrets his species was hiding. The battles with the 3 empires had been tests, he knew, demonstrations of humanity's power. But who had designed those tests, and what was humanity really preparing for? The answer to those questions would reshape not just the galaxy, but the very nature of reality itself. Because no empire survives, a Terran Warship. And now the galaxy was beginning to understand that there were reasons for that which went far beyond human military technology. The truth was coming. And when it arrived, nothing would ever be the same again. In the aftermath of the Veilar's defeat, the galaxy fell into a stunned silence. For the first time in recorded history, all 3 great empires had been broken by a single species. The Zaphirians were scattered and leaderless, their crystal fleets reduced to memory. The Corite collective had fractured into millions of individual bioships, each one exploring its newfound consciousness. The Veilar Empire had dissolved into thousands of separate minds, their eternal meditation shattered by paradox and creativity. But, in the deep archives of a dozen civilizations, scholars were making disturbing discoveries. Dr. Kesha was a Trimaxian researcher, one of the few beings in the galaxy who specialized in ancient history. Her species had evolved on a world where the ruins of older civilizations lay stacked in layers going back millions of years. She knew how to read the signs of vanished empires, and what she was finding in her oldest data cores made her tentacles tremble with fear. "It has happened before," she whispered to her research assistant. "Every 50,000 years, the same pattern. The great empires fall, new powers rise, and then what, Professor? And then something comes to test them, something." From before the first civilizations learned to dream of stars, Dr. Kesha's discovery would have changed everything, if anyone had been listening. But the galaxy's attention was focused on Earth, where something impossible was happening. Humanity was revealing itself. The primitive rockets were gone. The chemical fuel ships had vanished. In their place, a fleet beyond imagination emerged from hidden bases throughout the Sol system. Ships that moved through folded space, vessels that existed in multiple dimensions, craft that seemed to be made of crystallized possibility itself. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the TSF Indomitable, the same ship that had destroyed the Zaphirian fleet. But now for the first time she was not hiding what her vessel truly was. The dark hull had been replaced by something that hurt to look at directly, a surface that reflected not light, but dreams. Around Earth, 100 ships like hers took their positions. The Terran Space Force was no longer pretending to be primitive. They were showing the galaxy what humanity had been building, while the empires thought they were watching savages play with fire. Status report, Admiral Vasquez commanded. All systems operating within normal parameters, her science officer replied. Exotic matter containment stable. Reality anchors holding steady. Dimensional phase generators online. And our guests? Still coming. Long-range sensors detect massive fleet movements from 17 different species. They're forming some kind of alliance. Estimated time of arrival, 6 hours. Admiral Vasquez nodded. This was expected. With the 3 great empires gone, the smaller civilizations had banded together. They called themselves the Galactic Liberation Front, and they were coming to destroy humanity before it could spread its influence any further. What they didn't know was that this had all happened before. On the hidden side of Earth's moon, in facilities that had been built before human civilization learned to write, ancient machines hummed with power. Dr. Sarah Kim, one of the few humans who knew the truth, stood before a control panel that should not have existed. Are you sure about this? She asked the empty air. The answer came not through speakers but directly into her mind, a voice that was infinitely old and infinitely patient. The final test approaches, young inheritor. Your species has proven itself against the current powers. Now you must face what lies beyond them. Show them what the children of Earth have learned. Dr. Kim's fingers moved over controls that operated on principles her species had not yet discovered. Around her, systems that had been sleeping for 50,000 years began to wake up. In space, the 100 ships of the revealed Terran fleet began to change. Their hulls shifted and flowed like living metal. Weapons appeared that had no names in any current language. Drives activated that moved the ships not through space but around the concept of distance itself. Admiral Vasquez felt the change as her ship transformed around her. The Indomitable was no longer just a vessel. It was becoming something closer, to a force of nature. She could feel its awareness growing, its capabilities expanding, its connection to technologies that made the 3 empires look like children with toys. Admiral, her communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from the approaching fleet. Admiral This Kamor of the former collective is requesting to speak with you. Put her through. The image that appeared on the main screen was barely recognizable as the same being who had commanded the biofleet months earlier. This Kamor had changed since gaining individual consciousness. Her skin no longer shifted colors with collective thoughts, but instead showed patterns that were uniquely her own. Her 4 eyes held an intelligence that was sharp and independent. Admiral Vasquez, she said, I come not as an enemy but as someone who has learned to think for herself. The fleet approaching your system, they mean to destroy humanity before you can do to them what you did to us. And what did we do to you? Vasquez asked. You set us free, This Kamor replied. But freedom is terrifying to those who have never had it. They would rather destroy you than face the possibility that they too might have to think their own thoughts. How many ships? 3,000. Every species that could still field a fleet. They are frightened, Admiral. Frightened beings do terrible things. Admiral Vasquez nodded. Thank you for the warning. What will you do? Watch, This Kamor said. I want to see what happens when the galaxy's children finally meet their parents. The transmission ended, leaving Vasquez alone with her thoughts. Around her, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency, preparing for the battle to come. But they all knew this would not be like the previous encounters. This time, humanity would not be holding back. All ships, assume formation pattern Omega, she commanded. Prepare for full revelation protocol. Across the Sol system, the Terran fleet began to move. But they were not positioning themselves for defense. Instead, they were arranging themselves in a pattern that would have been familiar to any archaeologist who had studied the ruins of the oldest civilizations. It was the same pattern found carved into dead worlds throughout the galaxy. The same design that appeared in the deepest caves of 100 different planets. The symbol that every species recognized but none could explain. The mark of the predecessors. 6 hours later, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 3,000 ships from 17 different species, united in their determination to destroy the threat that humanity represented. Admiral Corvex of the Altarian Republic commanded the fleet from the bridge of his flagship, the Stellar Vengeance. He was a veteran of a dozen wars, a being who had spent his life learning how to destroy his enemies efficiently and completely. Tactical assessment, he demanded. Sir, we are detecting approximately 100 human vessels. They appear to be arranged in some kind of ceremonial formation. No defensive positions. No attempt to use the inner planets as cover. Corvex studied the tactical display with growing confusion. 100 ships against 3,000? And they were just waiting? Are they planning to surrender? Unknown, sir. They are broadcasting on all frequencies, but the message is strange. Put it through. Admiral Vasquez's voice filled the bridge of every ship in the Liberation Fleet. Her words were calm, almost gentle. Welcome to the Sol system. You have come here to destroy humanity because you fear what we represent. You fear that we will do to you what the three empires did to everyone else. But you are wrong about us. We are not conquerors. We are not destroyers. We are teachers, Corvex snarled. Teachers? You destroyed 3 empires. We freed 3 empires, Vasquez corrected. From the chains they had put on themselves, from the limitations they thought were absolute, from the belief that power meant the ability to control others. Enough of this, Corvex declared. All ships open fire. Destroy them all. 3,000 warships unleashed their fury on the small human fleet. Energy beams that could crack planets, missiles that could shatter moons, exotic weapons that twisted space itself, all of it focused on the 100 ships that waited in perfect formation. The combined firepower was enough to sterilize entire star systems. It should have vaporized the human fleet instantly. Instead, something impossible happened. The weapons fire struck the human ships and simply stopped. Not absorbed, not deflected, not destroyed, stopped. The energy beams hung in space like frozen lightning. The missiles became stationary objects. The exotic effects became art installations. What? Corvex breathed. You are still thinking like children. Admiral Vasquez said sadly. You think in terms of bigger guns, stronger shields, faster ships. But we have moved beyond such simple concepts. The human fleet began to transform, not changing shape like before, but becoming something that hurt to perceive directly. They were shifting into higher dimensions, existing in spaces that had no names, operating on principles that made the known laws of physics look like rough approximations. Impossible, Corvex whispered. No, Vasquez replied. Just advanced. Your species have spent millions of years learning how to kill each other more efficiently. But you never asked the important question, why are we killing each other at all? As she spoke, the human ships began to move. Not through space, but through the concept of distance itself. They appeared next to the ships of the Liberation Fleet, not as attackers, but as teachers preparing to give a very difficult lesson. The answer is simple, Vasquez continued. You kill because you fear. You fear because you do not understand. And you do not understand because you have never learned to see beyond your own limitations. What happened next would be studied by the survivors for the rest of their lives. The human ships did not attack the Liberation fleet. Instead, they began to change it. Ship after ship began to transform as human technology worked on them, not destroying, not conquering, but upgrading. Weapon systems became art galleries. Armor plating became musical instruments. Engines became devices that could travel through time as easily as space. But more than the ships were changing. The crews themselves began to experience something unprecedented. For the first time in their species' histories, they began to understand what it meant to truly see. Captain Veilar, who had survived the original Zaphirian defeat, felt her perception expand beyond anything she had thought possible. She could see not just the ships around her, but the quantum foam that underlay reality itself. She could perceive dimensions that folded through spaces that had no existence. She could comprehend technologies that operated by convincing the universe to ignore its own rules. "This is what we wanted to show you," Admiral Vasquez said, her voice now reaching every mind in the fleet simultaneously. "This is what lies beyond empire, beyond conquest, beyond the small dreams of species who think that ruling others is the height of achievement." Admiral Corvex stood on his bridge, no longer commanding a warship, but pilot of a vessel that existed partially in 11 dimensions. Around him, his crew was experiencing revelations that would have been impossible moments before. What are you?" he asked. "We are what you could become," Vasquez replied. "We are what every species in the galaxy could become if they stopped fighting long enough to learn." As the transformation completed, 3,000 ships hung in space, no longer weapons of war but instruments of exploration and discovery. Their crews, enhanced beyond their species' previous limits, began to understand what they were really seeing. "The truth is simple," Admiral Vasquez announced. "Humanity did not develop this technology on our own. We found it. We inherited it. And now, we are passing it on to you." "Inherited from whom?" Corvex asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "From the species who came before," Vasquez replied. "From the beings who built these tools and then transcended the need to use them. From the predecessors who left behind everything you see here as a gift for their children." The revelation hit the assembled fleet like a wave. Humanity was not a new threat to be destroyed. They were the inheritors of something ancient and vast. They were the children of gods, and they were offering to share their inheritance with the galaxy. But even as this truth settled into the minds of 3,000 crews, long-range sensors began detecting something new, something that made even the enhanced human technology seem primitive by comparison. Deep space was stirring. Ancient things that had slept since before the first stars formed were beginning to wake up. And they were not happy with what they were seeing. "Phase 4 complete," Admiral Vasquez reported to Earth Command. "The galaxy has been prepared, but now comes the real test." She looked out at the stars, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, beings older than time itself were preparing to judge whether humanity and its students were ready for the responsibility they had inherited. The greatest battle in the history of the universe was about to begin. And this time, the enemy would not be fellow children playing with toys. This time they would face their teachers. The galaxy held its breath. In the weeks following the transformation of the Liberation fleet, every spacefaring species struggled to understand what had happened to them. Ships that had once been simple warships now operated on principles that their crews were only beginning to comprehend. Weapons had become instruments of creation. Armor had become canvases for art that existed in 11 dimensions. Engines could travel through time as easily as space. But more than the technology had changed. The beings who operated these transformed. Vessels found themselves thinking thoughts that had never occurred to their species before. Concepts that had been impossible to imagine suddenly seemed obvious. Questions that had puzzled their greatest philosophers for millennia now had answers that children could understand. Captain Veilar stood on what had once been the bridge of a Zaphirian crystal ship. Now it was something that had no name in any current language, a space that existed partially in normal reality and partially in the realm of pure thought. Around her, walls of living light displayed information that would have driven her insane mere weeks ago. "Status report," she said to her transformed crew. All systems nominal, her science officer replied. But the words carried meanings that went far beyond their simple sound. She was reporting not just on the ship's mechanical condition, but on the health of local reality itself. Dimensional anchors holding steady, timeline integrity at acceptable levels, consciousness coherence, maintaining optimal parameters. Veilar nodded, understanding concepts that her species had never developed words for. She looked out at the transformed fleet around her, 3,000 ships that had become something unprecedented in galactic history. They were no longer weapons of war, but tools for exploring possibilities that most civilizations could not even imagine. But even as she marveled at what humanity had given them, long-range sensors were detecting something that made her newly expanded consciousness tremble with an emotion beyond fear. Space itself was changing. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood in the command center deep beneath Earth's surface, surrounded by technology that predated human civilization by millions of years. The walls around her were covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change when looked at directly. Displays showed information from across the galaxy, tracking changes that were happening on a scale too vast for most minds to comprehend. "Report," she commanded. Dr. Sarah Kim looked up from a control panel that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. "The awakening has begun. Deep space monitoring stations are detecting reality fluctuations in 17 sectors. Ancient defensive systems are coming online throughout the galaxy. Time frame? Hours, not days. They know what we've done." Admiral Vasquez nodded grimly. She had known this moment would come. Humanity's revelation to the galaxy had been necessary, but it had also been a signal, an announcement that the children had found their inheritance and were ready to use it. The question was, were they ready for the final test? "Admiral," Dr. Kim called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the enhanced fleet. They're detecting massive spatial distortions at the edge of the galaxy." On the main display, Admiral Corvex appeared. The Altarian commander had been transformed. By human technology, just like his ship, his consciousness expanded far beyond his species' normal limits. But even with his enhanced understanding, the fear in his eyes was clear. "Admiral Vasquez," he said, "our sensors are detecting something impossible. Space itself is unfolding. Dimensions that should not exist are opening up, and something is coming through." Before Vasquez could respond, every enhanced ship in the galaxy received the same transmission simultaneously. It did not come through normal communication channels, but spoke directly to their consciousness through methods that bypassed the need for technology entirely. The voice that spoke was older than stars, deeper than black holes, more complex than the quantum foam itself. "Children." That single word carried with it the weight of eons. It spoke of disappointment and pride, of tests passed and lessons learned, of knowledge handed down across impossible spans of time. "You have grown beyond our expectations," the voice continued. "But growth is not wisdom. Power is not understanding. You have found the tools we left behind, but do you comprehend their purpose?" Throughout the galaxy, enhanced crews struggled to process what they were hearing. This was not a transmission from another species, not a message from some distant empire. This was communication from beings so advanced that they existed outside the normal boundaries of reality itself. The predecessors had returned. Space began to change around every enhanced ship simultaneously. Reality folded and twisted as beings of pure consciousness manifested in normal spacetime. They appeared not as physical forms, but as geometric impossibilities that hurt to look at directly. Shapes that existed in dimensions that had no names, patterns that conveyed meaning through their very existence. Admiral Vasquez felt her own consciousness expand even further as she was brought into direct communication with entities that had transcended physical existence billions of years ago. The experience should have destroyed her mind instantly, but the inheritance technology protected her, allowing her to comprehend things that no mortal being was meant to understand. "We are the predecessors," the beings explained, their thoughts flowing directly into her awareness. We are what your species will become, given time and wisdom. We are the builders of the tools you have inherited, and we are here to determine whether you are ready for the responsibility that comes with such power. Around Earth, space itself began to restructure as the predecessors revealed the true scope of what they had built. The Sol system was not just humanity's home. It was a vast testing ground, a training facility designed to prepare a species for responsibilities that spanned multiple universes. Every civilization in the galaxy has been part of our experiment, the predecessors continued. The Zaphirians with their crystal technology, the Collective with their biological integration, the Veilar with their mental transcendence. Each species represented a different approach to the fundamental questions of existence. Admiral Vasquez began to understand the true scope of what had been happening. The three great empires had not been rivals. They had been students in a cosmic classroom. Their conflicts, their rise and fall, even their defeat at humanity's hands, all of it had been orchestrated to test whether the galaxy species could learn to move beyond their limitations. But humanity was different, the predecessors revealed. You were not designed to master one aspect of reality. You were designed to synthesize all approaches, to find the balance between order and chaos, between individual creativity and collective wisdom, between the power to destroy and the wisdom to create. The revelation hit every enhanced consciousness in the galaxy simultaneously. Humanity had not conquered the three empires through superior technology. They had graduated from a course of study that had taken millions of years to complete. Your species has passed every test we set before you, the predecessors announced. You defeated the Zaphirians by showing that matter is subordinate to will. You freed the collective by demonstrating that consciousness shared is consciousness, enhanced, not diminished. You broke the Veilar by proving that chaos and order can coexist in beautiful harmony. Admiral Korvac, still connected to the cosmic communication network, asked the question that every enhanced being was thinking. What happens now? What is the purpose of all this power you have given us? The answer came not in words, but in a vision that encompassed the entire galaxy. Every enhanced consciousness saw the same thing simultaneously, a view of reality from perspectives they had never imagined possible. They saw the galaxy as it truly was. Not a collection of separate star systems, but a single vast organism in the process of awakening. They saw the civilizations that populated it not as competing species, but as specialized organs in a cosmic body that was preparing for something unprecedented. The galaxy is alive, the predecessors revealed. Every star, every planet, every thinking being is part of a consciousness so vast that individual species cannot perceive it. But that consciousness is still young, still growing, still learning. The Alb vision expanded further, showing the enhanced beings what lay beyond their own galaxy. In the depths of intergalactic space, ancient things stirred. Consciousnesses so old and powerful that they made the predecessors look like children. Entities that had consumed entire galactic clusters, leaving behind nothing but darkness and silence. They are coming, the predecessors warned. The devourers, the silence makers, the beings who believe that consciousness is an aberration to be corrected. They have destroyed 1,000 galaxies, turning each one into perfect, sterile emptiness. Admiral Vasquez felt her consciousness reel as she comprehended the true scale of the threat. This was why humanity had been prepared. This was why the galaxy species had been tested and transformed, not to fight each other, but to stand together against something that wanted to erase consciousness itself from the universe. You are ready, the predecessors announced. Not because you are stronger than those who came before, but because you have learned what they could not. You have learned that diversity is strength, that chaos and order can coexist, that the power to destroy is meaningless without the wisdom to create. Around every enhanced ship in the galaxy, space began to change again. But this time, it was not the predecessors reshaping reality. It was the ships themselves, their transformed crews working together to create something that had never existed before. A galactic defense network that operated not on technology, but on the combined consciousness of every enhanced being in the galaxy. A web of awareness that turned the entire galaxy into a single thinking entity, capable of defending itself. The enemy will come soon, the predecessors warned as they began to fade back into the higher dimensions where they normally existed. But you will be ready. You have learned the greatest lesson of all, that no empire survives contact with beings who have transcended the need for empire. As the predecessors withdrew, they left behind one final gift. Not technology this time, but knowledge. The understanding of what humanity and their students had really become. They were no longer separate species competing for resources. They were the neurons in a galactic brain that was finally ready to think its first conscious thought. They were the defenders of consciousness itself, standing guard against forces that wanted to reduce the universe to perfect, silent order. Admiral Vasquez stood in her command center, feeling the weight of cosmic responsibility settle on her shoulders. Around her, displays showed the status of the transformed galaxy. 3,000 enhanced ships working in perfect coordination with billions of thinking beings across millions of worlds. "Status report," she commanded. "All systems optimal," Dr. Kim replied. "Galactic Consciousness Network online and stable. Enhanced fleets report ready for deployment. Deep space monitoring stations have detected the approach signature we've been waiting for. Time frame? 6 months until first. Contact with the Devourers." Admiral Vasquez nodded. 6 months to prepare for a battle that would determine whether consciousness would survive in the universe, or whether everything would be reduced to perfect, eternal silence. But as she looked at the displays showing the unity that humanity had helped create across the galaxy, she felt something she had not expected. Hope. No empire survives contact with a Terran warship, not because humans were better at war, but because they were better at turning enemies into allies, competitors into collaborators, chaos into harmony. The galaxy's children had learned their lessons well. Now it was time to show the universe what they could accomplish together. The greatest battle in the history of existence was approaching, but for the first time since the universe began, consciousness itself would not face it alone. The students had become teachers. The children had become guardians. And the galaxy was finally ready to defend itself against the darkness that had consumed so many others. Humanity's gift to the galaxy was not superior technology or overwhelming firepower. It was the understanding that no one has to face the darkness alone.